This is a recap for a lot of people who already paint a bit of watercolour on the four types of mix and dilution that you can generally have in watercolour. I've broken it down into four basic types of mixture consistency. So I'm going to start with my brush. My brush has been dipped in water, flicked. Okay, so there's barely any water in it, but it is moist. It is not a dry brush. Okay, so for the viscose mix, I'm going to pick up some gooey paint. As you can see, it's quite gooey, isn't it? It's viscose. So I'm going to mix that around on my palette. And come in a bit closer for you, so that you can see its consistency. Not a lot of moisture there. So if I go to use it on my paper now, that's what I'll get, is a scratchy, dryish effect. Okay. Let's take some more paint, about the same amount as I used before, and put it there. And this time I'm going to dip my brush in the water and add incrementally, probably about 3 times as much water as I had with the viscose mix. Now the pigmented mix, when I drag it on, is more liquid. Well, it's not runny, but it's more liquid, and so it fills in the dimples in the watercolour paper. It is more solid when you put it on. So that's a pigmented mix. Okay, let's try a pigmented wash. So I'll go for the same amount of, move this down a little bit. Roughly the same amount of pigment I'll pick up as I did for the other two. About the same amount, so a blob there. Now this will be a pigmented wash, so I'm going to put 1, 2, go in small increments, okay, so that you can see how you're doing. We're in the fine arts. Watercolour is a fine art, and literally a brush full of water too much will make it too runny, and a brush full too less will make it too thick. So as you can see, that's spread already, hasn't it? Okay, so I would put a little bit more water, because we want this to be a pigmented wash. A pigmented wash is fluid paint, but it's still got a lot of colour in it. And when I put this on, you cover big areas quickly, and obviously when it dries, and you can see already now, it's going to dry paler than the pigmented mix. Pigmented mix has got more pigment to water. The pigmented wash has got more water than this one. So as we're adding water, the things are getting paler. Okay, because in watercolour that's how we make things pale, we add water. Right, for the last one, dilute wash, also known as a glaze. Let's do the same again. So I've got roughly the same amount of pigment. Now this time I'm going to really add probably double the amount of water that I had for the pigmented wash. And my aim here is to make this puddle almost transparent on the palette. So already can you see that there's brown in this, but even through that thin veil of brown, a glaze of brown, you can see the white of the palette. Whereas with this other one, mostly, say in this part of the puddle, you can't see the colour of the palette through that brown, can you? But you can with this one. And so I'd call this a dilute wash, also known as a glaze. And look how pale that is, you see? You've got a very subtle hint of that colour, and that's what we call a glaze. So that's what you need to think about for this course. Viscose mix, barely a breath of water on the brush and pigment straight from the tube. Pigmented mix, a brush full more of water, perhaps brush and a half full. Again, practice this. Pigmented wash, more generous amounts of water, same amount of pigment. And the dilute wash, tons more water and same amount of pigment. And your aim is to be roughly able to see, you know, through this. It needs to be transparent, because that's the whole point of a glaze. A glaze is a transparent veil of colour, which watercolourists like to use to build up many, many veils of colour, which all add subtle hue to their work. Okay, so practice this again, get the feel of it, because my measurements will be different to your measurements. The only way to know what a pigmented mix is compared to a dilute wash is to have a go and practice this. In this course, we're only ever going to be painting on wet paper or dry paper. So when I say wet paper, what I mean is wet into wet technique. So to do the wet into wet technique, you moisten your paper with clear water. And you wait, just sharing it out evenly, and you wait a few seconds until it's sort of soaked in a little bit. What we don't want is to paint into that where there's a puddle. So I just turn my paper around and share that water out consistently in this wet shape that I'm going to paint into. Only takes half a minute or so perhaps to dry in, and this is where you need to be able to wait and to watch and to be water aware, because with watercolour timing is everything. We're waiting for this to be uniformly sort of shining all over, and that's why I recommend working by a light source like a window, or have a good light by the side of you so that you can hold your board or your block to the light source and see what's happening with the moisture of your paper. I'm just going to help it here by just shoving that puddle back in to the other area, helping that to soak in. This might seem a bit tedious and laborious, but you omit doing this at your peril. This is where a lot of watercolourists fail, is because they really haven't paid enough attention to the water moisture. They don't think it's important, and it really is. So that's nearly ready. So I'd say that's about ready now to drop some colour in. So I'm just going to pick some colour up and paint into that. Okay, so that's wet into wet, and we're left with a soft edge there. Then obviously wet on dry is as it suggests. We've just got paint, and we paint on dry paper. And the whole edge of that is a hard edge, isn't it? Okay, because the water can't go anywhere and diffuse anywhere. It's a hard shape. So we're only ever going to paint wet onto wet or wet on dry. Then the next thing I want to talk to you about is the thirsty brush and the moist brush. A thirsty brush is a brush that you moisten really well, and then you dry on a toweling cloth. And then the thirsty brush will allow you to lift out a highlight. So if I just cut through that, see, it allows you to cut back to the white of the paper. So that's thirsty brush. Thirsty brush also is an absorbent thing. So say you've got a puddle of water or a puddle of paint, you can just touch this brush into it and it'll suck that up. So now for moist brush. moist brush, as it suggests, you need the best type of brushes for moist brush are the round ones. So I'm going to moisten a brush and I'm going to flick it really hard so that there's only a little bit of water in there. Then, say I'm applying some colour and I want it to have a soft edge. So I paint the colour, a little bit more strength, paint the colour on. And say I want to blend this side away. And I'll start with my little moist brush and I'll start a few millimetres away and go up and down, so I'm moistening the paper ever so slightly and then gradually creep up to that hard edge, go back and forth one more time and I've softened it off. Oops, and you've softened it off. If you find that it starts to creep out too far and then forms a second hard line, just rinse your brush again, flick it really hard and start a little way away again, a few millimetres away from that edge. Just go up and down slowly to give the brush a chance to deposit a little bit of water into which the paint can then flow. And then retreat with it, you know, come back. And then you've got a softer edge. Okay, so those are the techniques for this course. So we've got wet into wet, wet on dry, thirsty brush, and moist brush. So moist brush is for blending and thirsty brush is for lifting. So I'm going to put that, so blend and lift. And I would recommend you practice these a lot because this is what we use continually through this course.